So how do you see this huge push where now it's being turned into the miracle anxiety and depression, and there's a whole slew of different things that people are taking it for, and big institutions are stepping in. IPOs are being created around it from people who likely have never had the experience themselves, and running it, as business and industry as usual. How are you seeing all of this? Like, I mean, there's aspects of it that seem like, well, for sure, why, like, I can see there being a need for regulation. I can see there being a need, but I can also see the flip side of that, as the way that it's rolled out is either sacred or it's not. And maybe there's a clear line on that. Maybe it's up for speculation, but it really seems like we're now in a wave where there are a lot of people, even within the psychedelic community, and I know the psychedelic community is not just one thing with one singular ideology, thank God, that as this opens up, more and more people are going to have access to this profound experience, potentially making it less and less profound, even with Iboga, as people are looking for how do we get people off opiates without them actually having to experience what Iboga would give them, right? So take the psychedelic aspect out of it, take the ordeal out of it, and just get the benefit with none of the stuff that might seem uncomfortable. What are your thoughts on this as something that's just happening, like almost as like an archetypal event?
Yeah, well, so this is what we have to get into. I like how you phrased it. One of your phrases there was, as this is rolled out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's just take that for a second, because, I've gotten into this subject more than anybody I know on all aspects, phenomenologically, as an initiate of many different of these entheogens, and then as a scholar. And then also as someone who's worked directly, as you said, with these people that rolled this thing out. And I have, for the last, where are we, 2021, time is flying. The last 20 or so years been going through a whole process here, because I've learned that the way these things were rolled out in contemporary society was actually an op. It was an op by social engineers to advance, to propagate these drugs and psychedelic experience in American society. Okay, so now we can get into this. This is controversial material. It's difficult to talk about because on the one hand, as I'll say again and again, I have such great respect and awe for the power of these medicines. And a great deal of what's going on in contemporary society, I think, is wonderful. When I really got into it in the early 1980s, I was a kid, and I saw a world in an environmental crisis that needed radical transformation and awakening. And it was, and I thought that the psychedelic drugs could help. And so I busied myself to help reignite the conversation about psychedelic drugs. I organized conferences. I had a drug lab. I turned people on. I was doing it more like a mystery school model, secretly turning people on and all this. Well, anyway, in this process, I got to know Wasson. He liked me. The family and I had a rapport. And I decided to begin to work on a documentary film. And I gained access to the Wasson archives, which are kind of stored at Harvard University, and you need permission to get in. And it's a massive archive and a fascinating library. And so I was beginning my process. I was actually a guest in Rick Doblin's house, staying in his attic, and and Harvard gave me a secretary and an office, and I had my secretary. I had a menu of all the things in Wasson's archives, and I was looking at all his mushroom stuff, but then I saw a thing like correspondences. And so I said, well, bring me that file, please, and brought me this stuff. And I started to look at some of his material. And, you know, it was always odd in psychedelic history that Wasson was known as a banker. He was a vice president of J.P. Morgan. And so it's just sort of an irony that and Wasson was like the main instigator of the psychedelic story. There was Hofmann's discovery of LSD. That was 1943. That was, mostly known just by scientists and pharmacologists, and there was lots of research, but it wasn't like a big thing. Aldous Huxley had written The Doors of Perception. That was a kind of big thing. That was what expanded it into a more literary audience. But then Wasson in 57, I think it was, 1957, publishes this article in Life magazine. And this was like the shot heard around the world. And this was an article about his expeditions into Mexico, where he discovered, so to speak, Maria Sabina, a Mazatec curandera or sabia, who was using, and so it's an article, about this banker on a hobby finds these mushrooms that produce visions. And suddenly this subject, which had been known hitherto a few people, was now literally, front page news in the most popular periodical in American journalism, Life magazine. And it was the article that many people will say started the psychedelic movement. People say it's erroneous, but say that Leary read the article and that's what gave him the idea. Well, that's not quite true, but true enough. And well, that article, written by a Wall Street banker, was actually funded. The expedition was funded, the publication material, the photography, the recording, the publication of it was a CIA operation.
Wow.
It was MK Ultra subproject number 58.
Wow.
Okay. So that was, I'm looking at Wasson's stuff. In fact, Gordon, if you know some of that stuff that I sent you, I have just a little smattering of things, last night, kind of hastily preparing for this conversation. But I had asked Wasson, in fact, a published interview in my first book, I asked Wasson about the CIA, and he said, it wasn't really that significant. He kind of brushed off the question. He said, they tried to infiltrate my thing, but I didn't really want to work with them. That's a total lie. Wasson wasn't a banker per se. He wasn't a banker in terms of dealing with interest rates or pension funds or retirement accounts or money, really. Wasson and JP Morgan, although it's a bank, but it's more than a bank, really. JP Morgan is a political force, a powerful political force, and a fascist political force. And so, they were backing the Third Reich and stuff like that. And so Wasson's position at JP Morgan was in public relations. He was a propagandist for JP Morgan. He worked in public relations to try to, spin stories and get a certain worldview going. And he was, I'm looking at these letters, and he's like pals with, for example, George Kennan. Now, students of modern American history will know George Kennan was not an especially nice guy. Wasson and Alan Dulles, okay?
Yeah.
They're drinking buddies. Wasson isn't just a banker. Wasson is in the very innermost circle of the American fascist movement. And this operation was MK Ultra Subproject 58, paid for by American citizens. Now we have to ask the question, why are these guys starting the psychedelic movement? That's the interesting question.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah.
Now Wasson had long died. And a growing number of scholars are becoming interested in this question, partly because I'm starting to speak out more, and I have a lot of correspondence, and we're looking at this and wondering, and why would they do this? What's really behind? What are the political forces behind the start of the psychedelic movement? And I want to go back to something you said, Ben, because this is something that I'm saying now too. I'm being a little sloppy when we say the psychedelic movement, because there's not a psychedelic movement. There are psychedelic movements.
Yeah.
There's one family of drugs, okay, plant drugs, but there are many different opposite people that use them for completely diametrical reasons. As I said about religion at the beginning of this conversation, sometimes religion is used to open your mind and bring you to awakening. But sometimes religion is to control your mind and lead you over there to the tax collector, right? So it's very, very important that we look at the psychedelic phenomena in this way. And which psychedelic movement are we talking about? But the one that started in America in the mid-50s with Wasson's impetus was a kind of very right-wing attempt to do something to society. And we have to explore that question.
That's super fascinating. It's, I mean, because there's so many more stories later on after that Time magazine article. In France, there was a leaked, I think it might have even been a US op that sprayed LSD over a town in France, and there were people hospitalized for that.
Yeah. You're talking about the incident at Pont Saint-Esprit in 1951, which was a collaboration of Sandoz and the CIA.
And so Sandoz was the lab that Stan Grof got his start at, correct? Or was that
that's where LSD was discovered by Albert Hofmann.
Hofmann, that's right.
Yeah, Sandoz sent the LSD when Stan was a psychiatrist in Prague. That's where he got his first one. Yeah, it all started out of Sandoz.
Robert, would you like me to pull up any of the specific documents referring to any of this?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Just let me know which one you would like to just.
No, not that one. Skip past that one. I should have find the one. It's a handwritten one by George Kennan. Oh, that we'll get back to that. Funny. These are all great. I mean, we could. Okay, that's the one right there.
Okay.
That was actually one of the first ones I saw, because I had asked Wasson in my 1985 interview, because I'm a hippie scholar, and I'm thinking, God, if we could just get the captains of industry to turn on to LSD, they would have these unifying experiences, and they would then direct their investments to, unity consciousness and helping to save the world. And so I asked Wasson this. I said, did you ever talk about your mushroom hobby with your Wall Street friends? And he said, no, I never did. Those were two completely different worlds to me. And so I'm going through his letters, and I find this one. My God. I mean, I knew a little bit about who George Kennan was. George was one of the principal operatives in Operation Paperclip.
Oh, wow. Explain that super quick, just for people who may not know, just super quick.
Okay, well, Paperclip, let's see, what's the simplest thing? At the end of World War II, World War II didn't really end the way modern history tells you it ends. The Allies didn't defeat the Nazis. That's not really true. What happened is that the Third Reich realized that they were getting their asses kicked. And so they pulled kind of a switch, and they laid low, made it look like they were defeated, but a kind of secret invasion took place. Now, Paperclip was the secret importation of thousands of Nazis. Many of them had been convicted war criminals at Nuremberg. Really dark and despicable guys with a worldview of global domination. This is where Foster and Kimberly, I love their phrase, the global domination agenda. They left Germany and they came over here to the United States, many thousands of them, and were given positions in all kinds of places, in banking, in publishing, in universities,
NASA,
in defense, NASA. Okay. Well, Kennan was one of the guys that kind of, helped operate Paperclip. Kennan was, let's see, what was his position? And even after the US entered the war, Kennan was in Germany giving speeches on how it was in the US interest for Germany to win. So he's like an uber fascist, like these guys like Dulles and, many of them. And so then I read this document, this letter here. This is George Kennan writing to Gordon Wasson, telling him about the doors of perception in Aldous Huxley. Now, Wasson had already known Huxley at this point. In fact, I have some of their letters. But that was like, I thought you weren't talking about this stuff. And here, look at this. This is like one of the, what's happening here?
So like, I didn't actually read every word on that. What was the overall gist? Was he was filling Kennan in on Aldous Huxley and Doors of Perception?
No,
what
Kennan was, that was a letter from Kennan. To Wasson.
Oh, wow.
Kennan, this guy, now Kennan is the guy who's responsible for the Cold War. Kennan is this mysterious Mr. X who helped devise the Cold War. There he is. Who that ends up, in this massive, direction of funds, American taxpayers' funds, to create these nuclear arsenals and defense, massive defense. But he's the guy that Eisenhower warned about when he said, "Beware of the military-industrial complex." That was kind of Kennan's doing. Okay.
Make sure y'all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.